Hi everyone, good afternoon. I'm here to share with you my insights in teaching coding online using learning experience design strategies. This is Lea Abarentos. I'm a UI and UX instructor. I'm a project manager from the Digital Technology Office of the De La Salle College of St. Benilde. And aside from my work as a project manager, I'm also a freelance LMS and web developer. So, my goal for today is for me to be able to share with you my collective experience as a UX expert, as an educator, and as a developer as well. I'm looking forward to sharing with you, our dear educators, some inputs in designing your courses using learning experience design strategies to enhance student engagement and to achieve learning outcomes. So these are some of the things that I am going to showcase for this afternoon. First, what are some of the challenges of teaching coding online? I believe that some schools have canceled their specialized computer subjects to focus on other subjects during this pandemic. I will also showcase how I teach coding, especially in an online setting. And just for the information of everyone, I regularly teach persons with disabilities basics of web design and development in De La Salle College of St. Peniel. And I'm using learning experience design as my teaching methodology in teaching coding online. And with that, I'll be giving you an overview of what a learning experience design is. I will also be sharing with you how I combined LXD in teaching coding online. And lastly, I'll be sharing with you some techniques that you can consider in leveling up the engagement of your students, especially online. Okay? Now, let me start by sharing with you my long-term passion. It is teaching coding. So, why do I love doing it? I've been teaching coding for over 20 years. I started teaching coding in 1999, so that is about 2 decades already. I still find meaning and purpose in doing it. For me, teaching coding is both fulfilling and empowering. It is so fulfilling to see my students become creators and enablers. I just love to see my students create websites and apps for real world problems. My hope is that this passion of mine and this persistence of mine will drive my students to dream big and become future programmers, developers, and IT leaders someday. One of the many reasons why I believe that coding has to be taught is, of course, in this digital age, coding is already considered as a basic literacy and is one of the most critical skill or the most important skill of today. Okay, for me, our students should have at least some basic understanding of how to develop software. Because again, it is considered as the most important skill of today considering the evolution of jobs, modernization, and future proofing of organizations. Coding is also an emerging skill of the future. In a study conducted by one of the market research firms, there were about 26.4 million estimated software developers in the world as of 2019, and the number is expected to keep growing exponentially in the coming years, which is so much higher than any other jobs. Lastly, coding teaches us to think in different ways to solve real problems, to create new things, to recreate things that others have made, and to integrate them into our own creative processes. Even though many schools, companies, organizations, and individuals highlight how coding is accessible, engaging, fun, exciting, and teaches computational and critical thinking, we are still challenged with the delivery of coding subjects. This challenges increased significantly during the pandemic also. Now, let me discuss some of the challenges in teaching coding. The first challenge is the technicality of the subject. Programming languages are difficult to grasp due to the highly technical nature of the subject. Learning how to code requires time and persistence too. So learning how to teach coding, it doesn't happen overnight. And due to the complexity of the programming language, it is time consuming and it takes a lot of practice also to learn a new language. The next challenge is the feeling of isolation. There's no doubt that online education has enabled students to work independently. Studying coding remotely may enhance the learner's concentration and grasping skills, but it is somehow taxing for them because there are fewer collaborative activities and socialization among learners, which could have been more engaging and exciting. Of course, face-to-face interaction will always be more personal and meaningful to some, but with the right technique, this can also be successful in an online setup. And also, in a face-to-face setting, the instructor can easily check or debug the codes of students right away. And it is more personal and instantly provided too. Well, I remember teaching coding in a face-to-face settings when I can move around and check instantly all the output of my students. But thanks to some real-time collaboration tool that reduces the isolation challenge. For instance, the live share of Microsoft Visual Studio Code enables students to quickly collaborate with classmates or professors on the same code without the need to sync the codes. The idea is that two people working together are more focused. They can come up with better ideas and fill in the gaps for each other. In fact, there have been studies that prove that two people working together increase productivity over working separately. Now, the third challenge is the expert's blind spot or the inability to perceive the difficulties of students. In teaching coding, you, instructors, should be able to put yourselves into the shoes of your students. So this widens the gap between the instructor and the learners in understanding the complexity of the language. Now, the key idea of teaching coding is to explain the complex concepts to a newbie or novice and let them absorb the ideas for some time. So, explaining in layman's terms programming concepts or using some analogies reduces the pressure on the students but also facilitates the unfolding of new ideas. The last challenge, giving instant feedback. In teaching coding, it is critical to provide swift and responsive feedback to students. Giving feedback on programming like how to write syntax, code construction, doing loops is fundamental to every student, but doing this online is another challenge. So students should be guided on how to use automatic feedback tools for errors and debugging activities. And what is good about programming tools is the availability of syntax highlighting and code editing tools to help the students troubleshoot syntactic problems. So to summarize, these are the challenges of our coding instructors. The lack of subject knowledge correlates with the lack of time, training, resources, and maybe support. While differentiation in assessment challenges can be addressed by providing the right teaching approaches. For me, the identified challenges can be solved by the right teaching approaches. For example, having enough resources and training for teachers, having hands-on experiences like collaborative work, pair programming, peer mentoring, and collaborations. Computational thinking can also be implemented like decomposition and more problem-solving activities, code manipulation, or relating to real-world activities and learning through examples. More practices and more engagement, and of course, using learning experience design. Now, the challenge is doing this online. To teach beginners, you need to consider the stuff you think is simple might be hard on their end. You have to worry about what order to teach, what skills you want the person to develop, and how you intend them to learn them. At the end of the day, the only thing that really matters is that those that take our courses walk away having learned something. So how I teach coding? This is my rule number one. Don't just code. Okay, most programming classes rely primarily on code and run exercises. But to keep your learners engaged, you have to provide opportunities for them to practice their skills in a higher level of reasoning. And for me to be able to do that, I need to consider myself as a learning designer. Let Now, what's my take on this statement? Our functions as educators have evolved. Before, our role as a teacher is just to teach what we know and what we are good at. Well, I remember when I used to present my lessons way back in 1999 using a pentel pen and colored papers. So just imagine teaching D base and C using colored papers and pens. But in year 2002, it evolved to using an OHP and PowerPoint that with the combination of storytelling. Okay, teaching before is just you and your story and your content. Now, this new normal pushed us to evolve and to upskill ourselves to become better learning designers. So my goal for today is not only to promote learning, but I want to guide and help you transform your learning content to something interactive and compelling for us to level up the engagement of our students. So what is LXD? LXD is a product of user experience and instructional design. It's a process of designing and organizing your content in a platform to enhance student engagement. Okay, so LXD is a product of ID and UX, or a combination of instructional design and user experience. Instructional design is a process of providing a structure and meaning to your learning materials. While user experience, on the other hand, is the process of creating a product or service based on the attitude, needs, and task flow of users. So LXD is the application of UX design principles, usefulness, usability, and desirability to create engaging learning activities. So LXD is a fusion of best learning practices by combining theories of learning pedagogies and tools with empathy, innovation, and prototyping. For me, it's about thinking beyond the course content or the online course modules. It's about designing your courses. It's about designing your courses and creating meaningful learning experiences. One of my ultimate goals as an educator is to develop lifelong learners. These are students who are motivated to learn, who can make a significant difference in this world. They are not afraid to discover new things from many different perspectives and innovate within. And for me to be able to produce lifelong learners, then I need to share with them or to teach them or to have them experience an effective learning experience design for them to be engaged and for them to have a very meaningful learning experience. Of course, the best content in the world can be made less effective if it is not designed properly for the learner. There are a lot of models to guide you when it comes to creating a course structure that is proven to work. Some are more elaborate while others are straightforward. All of these models are designed with one goal in mind, making sure that the course accomplishes its objectives. And I'm using this framework or process. So it's LX or the LXD process, a process of LX design merged with design thinking principles with curriculum development and application of emerging technologies to help teachers tailor content to student behaviors and preferences. So we have 6 phases here. The phase 1 is about understanding the learners. The second is about obtaining insights and writing the objectives. The third is about selecting relevant content. The fourth phase is about developing the actual learning experience solution. Now, the fifth is about the actual delivery of the lesson, and the last one is the iteration. Now, let's move on to the first phase, which is the discover. Discovering is about understanding the learners and assessing their needs. You can actually implement user personas, okay, with this particular phase. Let me showcase some examples of user personas that I am using. Okay, let's have the first one. Okay, so the user persona here is Sonia. Sonia is considered as an intrepid explorer. She's 18 years old. Okay, and she's a marketing management student. Her pain points: she has high expectations but limited amount of money and lack of patience with poor UX. Now, in terms of technology behavior, it's perfect. Expectations is very high too. Adaptability is very high too. Now, opportunities, of course, okay, she can use a wide range of technology. Okay, she's very curious with the latest strategies in e-learning. Okay, she is exposed to a variety of content types, promotions, and discounts too. Okay, now the question is, how will you design a learning experience for Sonia? Sonia is considered as an intrepid explorer, someone who actively seeks learning opportunities. Perhaps what you can do is to make her enjoy trying out new platforms and solutions because she is never satisfied with status quo. Now let's have another example of a persona. The tricky pupil. Okay, so we have Hal. He's 22 in his maximum residency. Pain points, bad experiences with other platforms, resistant to new services and ways of learning. Learning, especially online, is not a priority for him. Now, the opportunities, he wants qualifications. He needs the value of courses, clearly illustrated. Classroom learning is of greater initial interest. And in terms of technology behavior, it's low. The expectation is average and the adaptability is low too. Now the question is, how are you going to create or design your learning experience for a tricky pupil? Now, a tricky pupil really doesn't want to do anything online. He's not motivated, okay? He is not actually he's not actively looking for a personal development opportunities too. And there should be a good reason to try out the platform and an excellent experience to stick around. However, if you can convince this type of students, they might just become one of your most engaged users. Now, let's move on to what I do in my classes. Okay, you can even ask my students. I'm really doing this every time or during the first week of class. I always start with a self introduction. This is a form of user research for me, or a user persona, or a profiling, wherein I ask my students to uh, I ask my users their profile, who they are, their interests, what they're good at, their expectations. Okay, it helps me to adjust my activities based on their profile, expectations, and interests. Okay, so that is the first phase. Now we move on to the second phase. The second phase is about defining or obtaining insights and writing the objectives and goals. When you write your objectives and goals, okay, of course, you have to go back to your course syllabus, course plan, or lesson plan. Okay? Then write your learning outcomes or the objectives based on the goal of the subject and the background of your users. Or a measurable learning plan should include activities that will answer the question, what will students be able to do? And for you to be able to determine the measurability of the outcome, it helps if you would ask yourself, how will I know that students have learned? Okay. Now, the third phase is about selecting relevant content or doing some curation. When you do this when you are in this phase, you have to ensure that your content or the content that you'll be and make sure that you are incorporating a variety of perspectives and resources. There are a lot of resources online that can assist your student, but how to choose the best resource to showcase is a challenge. But your basis will still depend on your goal and, of course, your target users. Prioritize your efforts and energy in knowing the must have, okay, versus the nice to have content. Now let's have the fourth one, the fourth phase, which is develop. It's about developing the learning experience solution. So it's about considering a structured course plan like your timetables, your routines, deliverables, and programming activities. Okay, a clear and consistent organization will allow you and your students to focus more on learning the actual content of your course, not only from the beginning of the semester but throughout the remainder of the course. The beginning information in a course, along with the course syllabus, are both areas where you can answer initial questions up front, prevent some questions from needing to be asked, and prevent other problems from coming up. So there is no foolproof, perfect way to put a course together, but there are a lot of things that you can do that will make it easier for everyone involved and make it more enjoyable. So when you organize your course content, okay, make sure that you are going to organize your course content based on how the learners will consume the information. Okay? So make sure that you are using clear and consistent navigation tool. Like for us in our school, okay, we're trained to include module 0. Okay? And in that module 0, you should have posted in communication policies, the requirements, information on where to get assistance, information on accessibility of course technology, and other resources. Now, let me share with you an example course structure that I'm using in class. Okay, so if you will look at my example here, okay, I'm showcasing a sequential process from review to evaluate. Okay, the other areas of my course structure in between review and evaluate, I have there the activate, present, and apply. Okay, so I'll be discussing this further in the delivery phase. Okay, now let's move on to the fifth phase, deliver. Deliver is about the actual implementation of your learning design. Okay, it is divided into 6 or 5 stages. Okay, so let me start with the first stage that I'm using. I always start with an emotional buy-in, okay? Or the activate stage or the motivation stage. So, emotional buy-in is the first step in laying the foundation of learning retention. So, this can be done by telling a story or asking thought-provoking questions. So, it begins with attention or getting the interest of your user in a form of motivation that enhances cognitive processing. So, other examples of motivation or motivational activities are we can have quizzes, we can have games, or you can start with a challenging statement or even a storytelling. In my particular example here, I have here an activity, a motivational activity for my week 2 about how are you feeling? Okay, so I ask my students, how are they feeling? Okay, what are the things that they want to learn, and of course the steps for them to be able to learn or to achieve their objectives in learning the topic. Okay. Now, let's move on to the next stage about or phase. It's about present. Okay, the present is the step when the teacher introduces new information. Then the teacher guides the presentation, but there may be students' input or interactions too. Okay. Teachers do more than present content during this episode. Okay, teacher helps students actively process the content and assemble information into big ideas and important details. Now, okay, let's move on to the next stage. Okay, this is a step when the students or when the teacher consolidate learning. So the purpose of this reinforcement or reinforced activity is to deepen learning. Teachers engage students in strategic practice to help them solidify understanding of key content and increase their mastery of new skills. As for my example, this is not yet the final task. I just asked my student to create a simple HTML page without any background. Just create a simple HTML page using the basic tags. Okay. So again, this is not yet a final task but a simple activity to test their acquired knowledge from the presentation. Now, apply is the second to the last stage. This is the step when the teacher extends learning by applying through demonstration. So this is when the learners further consolidate and extend learning by applying it through a problem-based learning or other authentic assessments. So in this particular stage, the teachers have to challenge students to demonstrate, synthesize, and transfer their learning. Okay, I always use PBL or a teaching method in which complex real-world problems are used as a tool to promote student learning of concepts and principles. So it can be in the form of hands-on learning, design challenges, case studies, and the use of collaborative or paired drill activities. So in my particular example here, I provide varied and meaningful activities that prepare my students to accept and meet challenges in the real world, and these challenges engages them deeply with the topic. Now, the last stage is about evaluation. So this is the step when teachers help students look back on, learn from, and celebrate their learning. Um, the learning process, of course, should be evaluated in a form of reflection or asking the students their key takeaways. Like in this particular example, I ask my students to post their key takeaways and their moving forward plans too. Okay. Now we move on to the last stage. Okay. It's the iteration. So iteration, of course, offers new opportunity for an improved learning experience. So what you need to do with iteration is that, okay, remember that the LXT process is cyclical in nature. So make sure that you put together or you put together your design to a test, okay, with a group of learners and fearlessly document the failures and successes of your course design. Okay, now let's move on to the tips and tricks or how to implement a successful coding class. Okay, the first tip is, of course, to set a dedicated consultation hours. So make sure that you will have a dedicated schedule hours where students can drop into a video call or ask you questions, whether it's through Zoom, Google Meet, or Microsoft Teams. So use standard communication tools also like your learning management system, email, or discussion forums, and make sure to ask your students to enable notification features too. You can also set clear expectations also to your students on how they can contact you and what's your availability or response time. Now, the next tip is about feedback. Providing timely and useful feedback is necessary to keep the students on track even online. So this impacts the students' interest in learning the next topic. And when you give feedback, please do not just simply add a mark that says good job or excellent. Make sure that it is personalized and meaningful. The feedback that is detailed and positive in nature tends to be more effective. It creates a clear picture and increases transparency too. It helps your students gain new knowledge, or it helps them avoid repetitive mistakes, and it helps them learn new skills and get better results. Now the next step is for you to provide step-by-step instructions or tutorials. Okay, for me this is very effective, especially in my coding classes. Okay, tutorials are very effective in explaining to a user how to carry out a specific or identified task, especially in an online coding class. So in my example here, I already have a pre-recorded lessons from weeks 1 to 14. So if in case my students will miss any of the lessons, then all they need to do is just to refer to the video guides. Now, the next step is about working collaboratively. Okay, it's about allowing your students to work with their friends with whom they can learn or enjoy programming with. You can actually assign this or let them choose their own programming bodies or groups. Pair or peer programming software can be utilized in this kind of setup too. So I believe that two heads are better than one, or two or more heads are better than one. So having a study buddy can make learning easier and more fun too. Okay? For me, this one is working. Okay, writing daily takeaways. Okay, so this daily journaling is also effective, especially nowadays. Okay, it is about having the students fill out a daily reflection about what they are struggling with via Google Form or any forms of other technology for you to review and respond and reach out to your students who need help. You can also try this one. Okay, so include self-assessment opportunities in your learning design. So this will allow your students to take more responsibility for their own learning. And grading their own output is motivating and sometimes a very humbling experience for them. Okay? The next tip is about guaranteeing your students that the course materials will not be creating barriers, or making sure that your course components can be viewed on all types of devices. So, improving the course accessibility for all by taking minor steps towards accessibility improvement of your course materials should be considered. And lastly, try to incorporate gamification in your courses or establish a reward system to recognize the achievements and simple wins of your students in class. Remember that simple badges and certificates encourage engagement. Now, let me end my session by sharing this video from the late Sir Ken Robinson.
Education and our lives as human beings are not linear. That's an industrial idea, that you start there and you get there. Our lives, if they're anything, are cyclical and kind of recursive. That there are moments of growth, there are seasons of personal growth and development and seasons that are fallow. And it's not over until it's actually over. And that, the very old, like the very young, still have enormous amounts to find out about themselves if the conditions are right. And I feel it's the great role of a teacher. When I was saying moving to a different metaphor, an organic metaphor, I think it's going from an industrial metaphor to back to an agricultural one. Because if you think of it, a great gardener, great farmer, depends upon plants growing under their care. Otherwise, they're out of business. But the irony is that every farmer and gardener knows that you cannot make a plant grow. You cannot do that. You don't stick the roots on and paint the petals and attach the leaves. The plant grows itself. What you do is provide the conditions for growth. And great farmers know what the conditions are and bad ones don't. Great teachers know what the conditions of growth are and bad ones don't. And with bad teaching, all this potential of students shrivels in the face of it. With great teaching, all this stuff starts to flourish and to flower. And that, to me, is the great gift of teaching, to recognize that growth is possible at any time. Like in Death Valley, in the most deathless place on earth, there's life there, if you know what the conditions are. And the great challenge for teaching, I think, is not just to know your discipline, but to know your students, and to know what the pedagogical relationship is that will make them flourish and become the best thing they can be. And I think that it's not just something for the young, and increasingly it's something that we should see as intergenerational, rather than just something that happens at the beginning of our lives. It should endure throughout the whole of it. Thank you.
As Sir Ken Robinson quoted, "We have the power and duty to create the best conditions for students to flourish." Let's take advantage of that power and take these challenges as opportunities for us to design better learning experiences for our students. Let's reflect on the current learning designs that we have. Let's review, let's revisit, let's evaluate, iterate, and transform. Just as our world and our students are always changing, so must our designs for learning. Okay, so that would be all. Thank you very much, everyone, for your participation. I just have one last request for you to share your key takeaways by scanning the QR code on the screen and answer the question: how might we make online learning be a compelling learning experience for our students? So again, this is Lea Abarentos. Thank you very much and good day.